Welcome to our lunchtime talk series, brand new that we're featuring each week in September as we all head back to school. What I'm hoping that you can do is, I know that we're all very, very tired of endless Zooms, and I know I'd love them to be over, but also I know that the one positive is that it gives us this really cool opportunity to connect on a regular basis with people from around the country that we wouldn't normally be able to connect with. But I'd like you to do your best to try to pretend that we're just gathered around for a quick lunch in the cafeteria or faculty lunch area or the break room, whatever it is, and having an intimate conversation about big ideas that shape the work that we care so much about. The series is at noon Eastern time today. You're already here, so you know that. On the 15th to 22nd and at 2:30 Eastern on 9/29. Our topics will begin where all things begin today, with belonging. We have an expert on the topic in Jamal Williams, so I'll introduce here in just a moment. I would like you to take a quick note of a couple things. Number one, if you didn't hear me before, go ahead and open up that chat window. Let us know who you are, who you're with. You should also see down at the bottom a Q&A button. If you have questions, when you have questions throughout today's session, you can put those in the chat and kind of talk about them there, or you can stick them in that Q&A and you can see and vote up other people's questions while you're there. I'm making sure that you can. Nope, I'm going to change that so you can do that now that is set. And we're going to get to as many of those as we possibly can. And Jamal doesn't know this yet, but you know that I always offer that if we have leftover questions, we'll get those to Jamal to answer as he's able, and then we'll get those up to you with the follow-up after the session. So Jamal Williams. Jamal is committed to building youth to affect social change. A native of Queens, New York, Jamal graduated from Cornell with a degree in psychology and has used his talents and talent development throughout his career. Jamal served as an AmeriCorps member with City of New York for 2 years. After his service years, he redesigned and ran the Summer Institute program at Ithaca College, their pre-freshman summer program. After serving as the recruitment manager for City of Boston for 3 years, Jamal moved to Detroit to manage the Detroit City Council campaign. And afterwards, Jamal served as the national recruitment director for City Year. He currently works at Partnerships in Education and Resilience, PEAR, as the assistant director of training. His passion for youth development is only matched by his love of reading, drawing, cooking, and a sweet mid-range jump shot. And I also learned just a minute ago before you all came in, also with the best, apparently, mac and cheese that you can eat. So I can't talk today. So I'm very, very excited to eat some of your mac and cheese the next time we're somewhere where you have access to a kitchen. Jamal, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. What do you have to share with us?
Happy to be here, first and foremost. Appreciate you, Jeremy. And I don't even need a full kitchen. We can just rock with a kitchenette, right? I'm good for that. But again, greetings, everyone. Really excited to be with you all today, especially to talk about a really essential topic. And that topic is belonging. As was said, belonging is really at the heart of all learning, right? If all learning is both social and emotional, we have to make sure that we are creating and curating spaces where all people, especially our youth, feel as though they are a part of what is happening. That is the only way that true learning is really going to stick. So I got some slides. We're going to open it up as we go through. I'm going to hit y'all with some prompts for reflection, because it's good to get information, but it's also good to process it. And I'll start with just a quick primer on who we are at PEAR, what we do. We work with school districts, youth-serving organizations to substantially increase social emotional skills and resilience in the service of academic and life success. We feel like it is important to recognize and acknowledge the crucial learning that can happen when we're able to combine social emotional work and development with really high quality STEM education. So as we're going to think about the ways in which we can really center belonging and build belonging in STEM classrooms, really want to just kind of level set with a bit of some definitions, right? As we think about belonging at PEAR, we really break it down into these three key features: relationships, acceptance, and identity. Relationships, again, are at the heart of all things. It's in the connections that we have to each other that we are then able to really take advantage of all of the things that we can learn. as I reflect back on the educators in my life who have been the most influential for me, it all comes down to that relationship. They got to know me. They got to understand me. And in that process, they gave me the skills and the tools needed to get to know others as well. When we engage in that relational work, we're then able to promote that acceptance. We all want to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, whether that is a classroom, a school, a program, a neighborhood, a community, right? That feeling of acceptance and that feeling of, oh, I know that I belong here is so essential as we're thinking about crafting and designing learning spaces. You can't get to those two things without the third, right? Relationships and acceptance are great. In order to do that in an equitable and really sustainable way, we have to be able to understand identity, not just our own, so that we know how we are showing up and the ways in which we are making ourselves accessible to our youth, but also our youth's lived experiences, the identities that they claim. We work in the space of development at PEAR, so it's also important to note that identity is a formation is a process. And through that process, belonging is really the underpinning part of how we can better understand ourselves to understand others. Because this need for belonging is key, not just in terms of our social development, but also for our well-being. And talking about belonging now from this perspective of promoting positive well-being is where we want to go for our brown bag today. Because we know what it looks like when we don't belong. We know what it feels like. I'll invite folks just to reflect on a time when you have entered a space and did not feel like you belonged. Perhaps relationships had yet to be developed in that particular space. Perhaps you did not feel that level of acceptance in that particular space. Or perhaps as you looked around that space, there were folks who may not have shared the identities that you claim. The impacts of not belonging in a particular space are palpable. In a recent research review, we found that social disconnection can be processed in the brain the same way as the threat of physical harm. So as we're thinking about safety and how we are creating safety for our youth, we want to be super mindful that if we don't park this belonging bus, we could be setting up our young people to experience a lack of safety in a way that physiologically can feel the same as a stress response from physical harm. In addition, when these toxic stress responses occur or are possibly triggered by a number of different sources, it has a cumulative toll on our health, both physically and mentally for a lifetime. I bring this up because while it is crucial to understand what happens when we are not making these spaces where folks feel like they belong, we also know that when belonging is centered, it leads to better health outcomes, physically and emotionally. When we engage in strong relational work, stress-reducing neuropeptides flood the system, things like oxytocin, various other opioids, and that can boost our immune response and prevent the body from feeling the impact and effect of inflammation. The oxytocin signaling in our body can evoke contentment, which leads to greater trust, generosity, social bonding. And when we engage in these supportive, responsive relationships as caring adults, we can prevent or even reverse the effects of toxic stress. So that sets the table, right? We know belonging matters, Jamal. Didn't need you to walk us through that. Well, I'm glad you came on the journey nonetheless. How can we start to make this actionable? One way in which we can think about this is excerpted from a chapter by Walton and Brady talking about the many questions of belonging. and a lot of other spaces where I exist as either a trainer or a coach, I'm often hit with the question, so I know that belonging matters, but I don't know how to operationalize it. And these 6 questions can help us think of the ways in which we want belonging to show up in our spaces. The first question of belonging really centers around people feeling invisible, which if you were to ask yourself, how could this look for a young person in my classroom? We want them to be able to answer positively, does anyone here even notice me? When folks feel invisible, they feel disconnected, right? And when they feel that disconnection, that question that they then pose is, are there people here whom I connect to? Another way that belonging can manifest itself is around this concept of value. Both are people feeling as though they are valued, and is the setting one that folks found valuable? Is this a setting in which I want to belong, given the behaviors, the other folks who may be a part of it? Another question around belonging really centers on people feeling as though they won't be seen as a full person, right? Getting back to that identity piece. Can I be more than a stereotype here? Can I offer my full self whenever possible in this particular space? And then finally, people who feel that they are incompatible with a setting or a behavior, right? Are there people like me who jive, who vibe with this particular setting or behavior? Where I think in STEM education specifically, this question really comes to bear as we think about representation. Who are we able to bring into our learning spaces? Where can we take our youth as they explore various different industries and disciplines within STEM? Are they going to see people who look like them? Are they going to connect with and have an opportunity to engage with people who are compatible in those different settings? So let's get this chat a little bit active while we chew on things, maybe sip on things. As you all think about your particular learning spaces, which of these questions seem the most relevant to those spaces, and how come? Let's spend a little time in the chat here. And I'll also put in that plug for those folks who are not getting into this chat. Please get into it. There are some gems here. Jeremy's put in this piece around people feeling as though they are devalued. Absolutely.
So Jamal, while people are entering, and please go ahead and get your thoughts into there so we can talk about them. This is, we'll get a lot more out of this with some interactivity. But so here's the issue that I run into, Jamal, around people feel that they're devalued, is I know that the reason these people are here in a meeting that I'm holding or whatever is because I value their opinions.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are times when people will, not really talk, and I'll connect with them later and they'll say something like, I didn't think you really wanted me to, or whatever. I don't know how to get that across more and better, that you exist here in this room because you have great ideas. I want them. Please share them.
Great question. This is something I also experienced in a lot of training spaces where we are meant to engage in some dialogue, right? And I think one tactic that's been helpful for me is reminding folks at the top, everybody here is a leader and a learner. You came in as a leader, you came in as a learner, myself included. So while I have some information to share, as we think about the solutions that we are moving towards, we can only come up with these solutions together, because it's in that connection and it's in relationship that we're able to discover and unlock things we could not have thought of on our own. And I think that really applies to STEM education, especially as we're thinking about young people. So often the power dynamics in our classrooms are, I have information, you sit there and receive that information, and then you check in to make sure that you got the information I gave. When we can think a little differently and really use some of these questions to inform how we shift that paradigm a bit. So I love that you start with, hey, the fact that you are here means that you are valuable. Because I think that's an important piece that we should be making with all of our young people. Wherever you are valuable. And just because you may come in with a different knowledge set, a different language set, different cultural backgrounds and expressions, that does not mean that you are any less valuable than any other person around. So for folks who are thinking about, worrying about, that question, do people here value people like me? Make that value proposition very plain in your tactics, in your words, because words mean things. So we want to be mindful of the words that we use, and think about the structures that you can build that are going to reinforce that. One thing I always encourage folks to think about is, as you're designing your curriculum, your lessons, your unit, lesson plans, what are the ways in which youth's lived experiences are showing up in the work that you are asking them to do, the concepts they are looking to work through and work around, which is actually a really good pivot into thinking about how we make this a bit more actionable, right? If belonging is all about connection, what we want to hear our young people saying is, I connect. I connect with this content. I connect with this concept. I connect with the folks that I am learning with. I connect with the folks I am learning from. And it's
Jamal, I think that brings a really good comment that Deb made in the chat. Deb, you should be able to unmute. Would you mind making your comment to Jamal?
Yeah. First of all, I want to say hi to Ms. Black. I remember seeing you from the Tulsa area, so we live with, state to state next to each other. But one of the things that I really see with kids, and even for adults, when I do the Maker Fair in Springfield, if you don't know what a Maker Fair is, it's kind of like a science fair meets county fair on steroids. But it's all about people that make, create an event. So I have a lot of even older gentlemen that make things that think that they're not that cool, or they think they're cool, but they're not cool enough to put as an exhibit. So it's, whether it's a student or adult, I mean, you can't put it in an age bracket. I really feel that it's all of us, and you just have to kind of push some people a little bit to say, yeah, you are included. We want you. Is that kind of what you were looking for?
Absolutely. So Jamal, in that situation, how do we start to shift these perceptions of self-worth, particularly with people who we don't get to work with daily? We work with kind of sporadically. How do we create this environment where they feel their self-worth and they're excited to share it?
Awesome. Great question. And Deb, thank you for that. Thank you for that context around the Maker Fair. It sounds amazing. I'm trying to show up. Slide me those details if I can roll up as well. And I think you're getting into the piece around how we can start to help people recognize that they are valued, right? And I think it gets into this piece around connection. So this may be something that, as we think about belonging, how this really impacts young people, but I think it impacts all learners as well. So if you have some folks who are thinking about or worried about, oh, I don't know that I feel valuable here, the affirmation is a great place to start. And then being mindful to learn a bit more about folks' backgrounds, right? As we start to understand a bit more of where folks are coming from, what are the things that they consider interesting and cool, and why they are drawn to those sorts of things, the deeper we go, the easier it is to forge some connections to other people, to other content. So if you're thinking about, all right, how can I really support my youth in recognizing that this space is for them, that they belong here, regardless of the narratives that may tell them otherwise, affirm them, and then work with them to shift those narratives. It may mean doing some additional work to find those narratives that don't get as much spotlight. I know for myself, growing up, I thought of myself as a scientist, and I think it is easier for me to do that given the body that I inhabit and the access to various educational experiences that I had growing up. I also didn't make that connection of seeing myself as a scientist real until I got to college, and I was able to, turn my culinary skills and my baking skills into expressions of chemistry. That was the connection point for me. I enjoy food, I enjoy feeding folks, and that's what made that real for me, which then allowed me to say, oh, I am a scientist and I belong here. So think about the identities that your youth claim. Who are they excited to be? Who are they excited to become? And use those as the anchor points to then start to make those sorts of connections. Oh, you're really interested in planes because aviation is something that gets you real excited about. Let's do a bit of learning about some folks who work in that industry, who are building planes, designing planes, flying planes, and start to unpack what it takes for those sorts of tools and those sorts of machines to operate. Because we may then find that connection point, that piece of acceptance that allows a young person to get into something a little bit bigger than themselves. Yeah. So as we're thinking about this piece around connection and what this particular kind of leaf offers, we can also make this very plain for our learning spaces, right? So we want to look for those positive youth to youth interactions, right? What are the ways in which youth are encouraging each other? What are the ways in which they are learning about and from each other? We also want to make sure that we are showing up as the best versions of ourselves to encourage the facilitator to youth interactions. And as we think about those questions, especially around value, and is this space one that values people like me? Making support and checks for process very clear can be very helpful in that regard. Sometimes if a young person is unsure of whether or not they are learning the way other people are learning, if that is supposed to be valuable, but we are reminding them and demonstrating that there are a variety of different ways in which we can learn, process information, apply that knowledge, we want to make sure that how youth ask for help is made clear so that it will reduce some of the stress and anxiety around feeling as though if I ask for help, people are going to think I don't get it. It's fine to not get it. We're scientists. We explore. We don't necessarily know everything that we're moving towards, but we have some ideas. We have some plans. We're going to do some tests, and then we're going to reflect on what we learned, right? Mistakes just increase our opportunities for further discoveries. And then that piece around connection, again, we want to make sure that the content that folks are engaging in is connected to youth lived experiences and identities, right? As a youth worker, I was always told that they have to see us to be us. So as you're thinking about the ways in which you want to promote belonging within your programs, your classrooms, bring more people that look like, that have the same backgrounds as, that are excited about similar things as your young people. It will make a world of difference to really center that piece around belonging. I know we want to wrap to get into a bit of Q&A. I want to leave y'all with this question to chew on, right? As you think about those 6 questions, What is the question that you want to intentionally build a positive, affirming experience around next week? How can you take one of those questions, either around feeling invisible, feeling valued or disconnected, feeling as though youth can be fuller versions of themselves? Choose one, and then think about a way in which you want to intentionally build a positive and affirming experience around that question next week. And if you're less proximate to youth, do that for your staff and for your colleagues. Modeling how we build belonging amongst each other as caring adults is only going to reinforce it when we do it with our youth.
I love this. And Jamal, what I like about it is that, at least in my experience, for most people, what people want to see is that the effort's being put there. So don't be afraid to try and fail. If your heart and your exterior language is around inclusion and making sure people feel seen and heard and all of those things, if you mess up here and there, but you're open to hearing that you messed up, it all still moves the conversation forward. And we've got time for at least one question, and Leslie has a great one in the Q&A tool. Leslie, would you mind asking your question?
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. I just asked, how do you instill a sense of belonging in young people for a specific field that is currently behind understanding their value? It's almost like giving them a sense of belonging in the field's future that they're going to have to create, but it takes a lot of courage. So I want your input on that.
Yeah, so we have fields that aren't very accepting. How do we make that change, and how do we start that change from both directions?
Great question, Leslie. I think it starts with who is in front of them, right? It starts with recognizing that what is not necessarily what needs to be. It requires a lot of emotional labor to be a trailblazer, a trendsetter. So as we think about what are the practices we may want to employ, again, start with that affirmation. You are interested in this, and because you are a valuable human, that makes what you are interested in valuable as well. Let's explore it. Second, it is doing a bit of diligence around who else is doing this kind of work that you can connect to. And if, there are so many disciplines that are underrepresented for a variety of different marginalized identities, especially as we're thinking about the STEM disciplines. What that means is we may have to make some connections to something that is adjacent, right? We've got somebody, I know in the chat, folks are talking about geosciences. Absolutely. Severely underrepresented in that particular discipline. Perhaps there are some folks who are doing work that's adjacent, who still can have that connection with a young person, a group of young people. And instead, the conversation flips from the content to the process. Tell me about your story. How did you get connected to this particular interest area? What did you learn as you incorporated more knowledge from it? I want to do something similar, but in this particular lane. What might be some things that I can learn that I want to be mindful of as I forge a path that maybe a lot of folks have not been able to forge quite yet? I think that's a way in which you can engage in some meaningful relationship building, right? Getting at the relationships, the acceptance, and the identity, where the discipline becomes a bit agnostic, right? It's really about that learning around how do you navigate spaces that may not have been designed for you, but can still be for you.
Well, thank you, Jamal. I really appreciate it. There's never enough time when it comes to learning from Jamal. This has been our first in our Lunchtime Talk series, nice and short, that we're featuring each week in September at lunchtime as we all head back to school. Thank you, Jamal Williams and PEAR, for your incredible knowledge and leadership on this topic. This series is at noon Eastern time next Thursday, 9:15 and 9:22, and at 2:30 Eastern on 9:29. Topics we'll cover. Next, we have Dr. Kathy Dodd from the Oklahoma Department of Education talking about strategic use of ESSER III funding. On the 22nd, Denise Phillips from LEGO talking about nurturing play in the STEM classroom. And on 9:29, Sue Allen, Maine Guides Down East Rural STEM Education. We hope to see all of you there. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.